The crystal chandelier illuminated the elegant office where Hannah remained seated, her slender fingers drumming impatiently on the polished wood of the desk. Her dark eyes reflected the ambition that had consumed her spirit for years as she observed the documents spread before her. Wearing an impeccable executive suit, she emanated power and determination. Her black hair, pulled back in a severe bun, accentuated her angular features and calculating gaze. Hannah was the living image of corporate coldness, someone who had learned to transform her envy of her sister into fuel for her own ambitions. The panoramic window behind her revealed a sunset over the city, lights beginning to turn on in distant buildings, contrasting with the darkness approaching a small village in the distance, her next victim. Two people waited for her final decision standing before her. A man in a suit representing the construction company and a nervous-looking municipal inspector who couldn't maintain eye contact for more than a few seconds. "Are you absolutely certain that no one will suspect the demolition wasn't officially authorized? My sister cannot know about this," Hannah questioned, her voice carrying a tone of veiled threat. "I guarantee everything is arranged to appear completely legal, ma'am," replied the inspector, swallowing hard. Hannah smiled coldly as she signed the falsified documents with a gold pen. The movement of her hand was firm, despite the weight of the decision she was making: to displace dozens of families to build a luxury resort that would multiply her profits. The wall clock marked the hours with a tick-tock that seemed to conspire with her plans as night fell completely outside. She knew her sister Victoria would never approve of such methods, always so correct and concerned with her philanthropic image. It was precisely this certainty that fed her pleasure in acting in the shadows, building her own parallel empire within the company they shared. The two men observed with a mixture of admiration and fear the determination of this woman, who did not hesitate to destroy lives to achieve her goals. The artificial light of the office projected Hannah's shadow on the wall behind her, appearing larger and more threatening than the human figure itself. "But ma'am, there are still families living there. We would need at least a week for complete and legal evacuation," the inspector tried to argue, his voice betraying genuine concern. "I don't care if there are still people there. I want that land cleared by dawn," Hannah ordered, slamming her fist on the table with enough force to make the crystal pen holder tremble. "Either you do the job, or I'll find someone who will." The dark sky covered the small village like a cloak of silent threat. Rebecca was finishing putting her two children to bed in her humble house, with walls worn by time. Her young face of natural beauty and delicate features hid the weariness of a life of struggles and sacrifices. She wore simple but clean clothes, and her long hair fell in waves over her shoulders as she softly hummed to Emma, her little daughter, who hugged a cloth doll. The girl, with large, expressive eyes like her mother's, fought against sleep while Matthew, her older brother, organized his few school books for the next day. The boy had inherited his mother's determination, visible in his attentive gaze and protective posture, even so young. A faded photograph on the small dresser showed a smiling man embracing a younger Rebecca, the image Matthew contemplated every night before sleeping, trying to remember the father he barely knew. The house was modest but clean and organized, with personal touches that transformed it into a true home. Children's drawings on the walls, wildflowers in a bottle used as a vase, the aroma of homemade bread still present in the air. "Mom, is it true that someday Dad will come back for us like you always say?" asked Matthew, his eyes shining with childlike hope. "Some promises take time, my son, but your father was a good man who loved us." "Never doubt that," Rebecca answered, stroking the boy's hair while a stubborn tear threatened to fall. The first boom made the small house tremble from its foundations. Rebecca ran to the window, pushing aside the simple curtain to witness the horror unfolding. Large machines advancing through the village, demolishing houses without any prior warning, while men with helmets directed the destruction with professional coldness. Neighbors' screams echoed through the night, mixing with the deafening noise of walls collapsing. Immediate panic overtook Rebecca when she realized her house would be next. Her heart raced as she quickly pulled her children into the small wooden closet in the corner of the room, the only place that could offer any protection if the house collapsed. The lights failed, leaving them in darkness, broken only by the beams of flashlights and headlights moving threateningly close to the window. The vibration of the floor increased with each second, foreshadowing the imminent disaster. Emma began to cry, clinging to her mother's neck while Matthew tried to appear brave, even though his small body trembled with fear. "Don't leave here, my angels. Mommy will be back soon," Rebecca whispered, placing the angel-shaped medallion around Emma's neck. "This angel will protect you until I return." "Don't go, Mommy. They'll hurt you," Matthew pleaded, holding his mother's sleeve tightly as if he could prevent her from leaving. The sound of walls beginning to crack became deafening. Rebecca kissed her children's foreheads one last time before closing the closet door. She ran outside, determined to confront those responsible for the destruction, to somehow prevent her house, everything she owned in the world, from being destroyed. Dust had already filled the air when she reached the entrance, shouting for them to stop. A man in a helmet saw her and seemed to hesitate for a moment, but followed orders coming through the radio. The large yellow machine advanced mercilessly against the already weakened structure of the house. Rebecca tried to go back inside to her children, but it was too late. With a crash that seemed to split the sky, the outer wall collapsed, and a wave of bricks, wood, and concrete engulfed her like a relentless avalanche. Her last thought was for her hidden children, her last prayer that they would survive. "Please, God, protect my children. James, wherever you are, don't leave our children alone in this world," were her last words, lost under the roar of destruction. Inside the closet, Matthew held Emma tightly, stifling his own sobs so as not to frighten his little sister even more. The darkness was complete, the air saturated with dust, and the noise of falling debris remained deafening. He counted the seconds, waiting for his mother to come back for them as she had promised. But seconds turned into minutes and minutes into hours. Eventually, silence took over the place, a silence more frightening than the noise of destruction. Carefully, using the small flashlight that his mother always kept in the closet for emergencies, Matthew finally found the courage to open the door. What he saw made his young heart contract with pain. The house no longer existed. Where once stood their living room, his bedroom, the kitchen where his mother lovingly prepared meals, now there were only ruins. The closet had miraculously survived, protected by a beam that had fallen in such a way as to create a safe space. Morning light was already infiltrating through the debris, revealing the complete devastation. There was no sign of Rebecca anywhere, no matter how desperately his childish eyes searched. "Mommy?" he called, his voice small and broken by dust and fear. "Mommy, where are you? You promised to come back." "I want Mommy," mumbled Emma, her voice weak and confused after the traumatic night. Matthew had to grow years in just a few hours. Instinctively, he knew he needed to protect his little sister, who now depended completely on him. Carefully, he pulled Emma from the rubble and checked if she was hurt. Some scratches and a large bruise on her forehead, but nothing that seemed serious at first glance. He tried to find water, something to eat, anything useful in the debris of their previous life. The entire village was in ruins, some injured people being attended to by neighbors, others crying over the rubble of their homes. No one had time or resources to help two orphaned children in that moment of collective chaos. Throughout the day, Matthew noticed that Emma was becoming increasingly quiet, her eyes losing their spark, her skin growing paler. When she stopped responding to his calls, panic overtook the boy. He needed help, real medical help, or he would lose his sister too. "Don't leave me alone, Emma. Please don't sleep. I'll find someone to help us," Matthew promised, taking his sister in his arms, determined to save her at all costs. The contrast could not be more striking. While the small village lay in ruins just a few kilometers away, a charity event was taking place in a luxurious hall. Victoria, a woman of striking presence and natural elegance, had just taken the stage to announce her $1 million donation to a project supporting underprivileged children. Her green eyes, intelligent and compassionate, scanned the audience of guests who enthusiastically applauded her philanthropic gesture. Unlike her sister Hannah, Victoria had an accessible, almost maternal beauty, despite the sophistication of her designer dress and the discreet but valuable jewelry she wore. Her brown hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, framing a face that carried the maturity of 40 years with dignity. The smile she offered to the audience was genuine, as she sincerely believed in the power of social transformation through her actions. She did not know, however, that her sister was using the company they shared for actions that contradicted everything she believed in. It is only by fulfilling our duty to the most vulnerable that we can truly call ourselves human, Victoria declared into the microphone, her firm but warm voice drawing more applause. It's not charity, it's justice. After the congratulations and inevitable photos for the press, Victoria finally managed to leave the event. She was exhausted, more from the falseness of some attendees who pretended to care just to be seen with her than from the event itself. She walked to her car parked in the VIP area, thinking about the meeting she would have with Hannah the next day to discuss the company's new projects. Something bothered her about the recent financial decisions, but she couldn't identify exactly what. Her thoughts were abruptly interrupted when a small figure came running toward her, dodging the security guards. A boy, no more than a child, covered in dust and dirt, carried in his arms a small bundle that Victoria only identified as another child when he got close enough. Her instinct was to step back, protect her expensive purse, a conditioned reflex from the times when she needed to defend herself on the streets before building her empire. But there was something in the desperation of those childish eyes that paralyzed her. "Mom, my sister isn't moving. Our house collapsed. Mom hasn't come back. Please," the boy shouted, his words broken by exhaustion and fear. "Calm down, children. I'm just a businesswoman, not a doctor," Victoria responded automatically, but something in her heart was already twisting with compassion. "Where are your parents? Who is responsible for you?" Matthew had walked for hours with Emma in his arms. His small muscles ached from the superhuman effort, but determination kept him moving. He had seen Victoria on television once, in a report about powerful women. His mother had pointed to the screen saying that woman was important, that she could help people in need. It was this memory that guided him to the event location, this desperate hope that made him get past the security guards who tried to stop him. Now, before this elegant woman who seemed so distant from his reality, he felt his last thread of hope fraying. Emma was getting colder in his arms, her breathing so weak it was almost imperceptible. Tears began to stream down his dirty face, creating clear trails through the accumulated dust. "We have no one else, Mom. The house collapsed. Took Mom. Please, my little sister is dying," Matthew pleaded, extending Emma toward Victoria as a desperate offering. Something in the sincerity of that plea broke Victoria's last defenses. Overcoming her initial hesitation, she knelt down to the boy's height and looked more closely at the child in his arms. The girl was pale, with a bluish coloration on her lips that Victoria recognized as a sign of oxygen deprivation. Carefully, she took little Emma in her arms, feeling how light she was, fragile like a bird fallen from its nest. It was in this movement that a medallion in the shape of an angel slipped from the girl's neck, falling silently on the polished floor. Victoria picked it up mechanically, ready to put it back, when something about the object made her heart stop for a second. Turning the medallion, she found a symbol engraved on the back, a specific, personalized design that she knew very well. It was identical to what her late husband James had commissioned years ago, an exclusive gift that symbolized protection. "My God, it can't be," Victoria murmured, her world beginning to spin as impossible connections formed in her mind. "Where did this medallion come from, boy? Who gave this to your sister?" "It was our mother's. She said it was a gift from someone who loved us but who couldn't be with us," Matthew replied, confused by the woman's reaction. "Ma'am, please help my sister first, then I can answer anything." The shock made Victoria's legs weaken and she fell to her knees on the asphalt, still holding Emma against her chest. Her expensive dress was now stained with dust and dirt, but that no longer mattered. In her arms, the child who was barely breathing might have some connection to her past, to her husband, who had died in a mysterious accident years ago. The questions exploded in her mind. Could it be possible that James had another family? That these children were? No, it was absurd to think about this now. The most important thing was to save that girl's life. With renewed determination, Victoria stood up, still holding Emma firmly. "I'll help you. We'll take her to the hospital immediately," Victoria decided, her voice regaining its usual strength. "What's your name, brave boy?" "Matthew, Mum." "Han, she's Emma. Our mother's name is Rebecca," he answered, a slight glimmer of hope returning to his tired eyes. Carrying Emma, Victoria walked quickly toward her luxury car parked nearby, with Matthew following closely. Her driver, seeing the boss approaching with 2 children in pitiful condition, quickly opened the back door. Victoria entered first, still holding Emma, and signaled for Matthew to enter as well. The interior of the vehicle, with its fine leather and polished wood, seemed from another world to the boy, who hesitated briefly before getting in. The situation was surreal. Hours before they were in their humble home, now his sister was in the arms of one of the richest and most powerful women in the city, on the way to a hospital. Fate had drawn a cruel and strange path for them. "To the central hospital as fast as possible. It's an emergency," Victoria ordered the driver, while checking Emma's vital signs as best she could. "Hang in there, little one. We'll take care of you." "Will she be all right, ma'am?" Matthew asked, his small voice revealing the fear he was trying to hide to appear strong. "Do you promise not to separate us afterward?" When the car was about to depart, a security guard from the event approached quickly, knocking on the window with urgency. Victoria signaled for the driver to lower the window, irritated by the delay. The uniformed man pointed accusingly at Matthew, his face contorted in an expression of suspicion that made the boy instinctively shrink into the luxurious seat. It was the same kind of look that he and other children from the village always received when venturing into rich neighborhoods, a look that classified them as problems, as dangers, before they even opened their mouths. "Ma'am, this boy is suspected of thefts in the area. He was seen lurking around other events this week. It's not safe to take him in your car," the security guard declared with authority, extending his hand as if expecting Victoria to hand over Matthew. "That's a lie. I've never stolen anything in my life. My mother always said that honesty." Matthew began to protest, tears of frustration and fear welling in his eyes. Victoria opened her mouth to respond to the security guard, to defend the boy whom she instinctively felt was innocent, when a movement in her arms caught her attention alarmingly. Emma had begun to shake, her small body rocking in violent convulsions. White foam appeared at the corner of her lips, while her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. Panic overtook Victoria. She recognized the signs of a severe seizure, possibly caused by head trauma that she had noticed amid the girl's dirty hair. The situation had become critical in a matter of seconds. "She'll die if we don't get to the hospital now," Victoria shouted, all her usual composure crumbling at the possibility of losing that child. "Get out of the way immediately, or you'll be responsible for her death." The security guard hesitated, still blocking the vehicle's passage. In the distance, a photographer covering the charity event captured the unusual scene. The famous businesswoman Victoria in her luxury car with 2 street children, one apparently unconscious in her arms, while heatedly arguing with a security guard. The images, taken from a distance and without context, would seem to unsuspecting eyes to show Victoria being forced into the vehicle with the children as if she were being kidnapped. The same photos that, within hours, would reach Hannah's hands, feeding her dark plans in a way that not even she could foresee. "Please, let us pass. My sister is dying," Matthew begged, his young face contorted in desperation as he watched Emma convulsing in Victoria's arms. "I'll do anything. I'll even come back with you afterward, but first let us save my sister." Victoria's driver accelerated the luxury car through the city avenues, ignoring traffic lights and overtaking other vehicles with risky maneuvers. In the back seat, Victoria held Emma firmly, trying to control the girl's convulsions while Matthew watched in panic, his trembling hands holding the woman's arm as if it were his last link to hope. The city lights created moving shadows inside the vehicle, momentarily illuminating Emma's pale face and Victoria's determined expression, who had ceased being the calculating businesswoman to assume the role of protector of those unknown children who, inexplicably, seemed connected to her past. When the car finally braked abruptly at the entrance of the emergency room of the city's most prestigious hospital, an imposing building with mirrored glass facade and impeccably maintained gardens, Victoria didn't wait for the driver to open the door. She pushed it with her shoulder while firmly holding Emma against her chest, her designer dress now completely ruined by the girl's sweat, dirt, and blood. "I need a doctor now. This child is dying," Victoria shouted as she entered through the automatic doors, her voice echoing through the aseptic lobby and causing immediate commotion. "Why is everyone standing still? Don't you see that every second counts?" The reception staff hesitated, looking at the elegant woman with a dirty, ragged child in her arms and an equally dirty boy clinging to her hand. The contrast was shocking, almost surreal, as if two completely different realities had collided in that place. A nurse approached with a form, calmly explaining that they needed information for registration before initiating any care. Victoria's eyes sparked with indignation. She knew that hospital. In fact, she was one of the main donors to the pediatric wing, and her foundation funded medical research conducted there. But at that moment, she wasn't being recognized, covered in dust with disheveled hair. The clock on the wall marked each precious second passing, while Emma seemed to grow paler with each moment. It was then that Victoria decided to use the only weapon she knew was infallible in that world, her name and her power. "Listen carefully, because I'll only say this once." Victoria spoke in a low tone but loaded with authority, fixing her eyes on the nurses. "I am Victoria, and if this child isn't treated in 30 seconds, I will buy this hospital just to shut it down. Each one of you will be unemployed before dawn. Ms. Victoria." "Forgive me, I didn't recognize you in this state," stammered the nurse, suddenly pale upon understanding the magnitude of the error she had almost made. "Please come this way immediately. I'll call the director and the emergency team." Her medical team materialized almost instantly, as if they had emerged from the walls. Emma was placed on a stretcher with extreme care, and Victoria felt a strange emptiness when the little girl's fingers slipped from hers. Oxygen tubes, heart monitors, and various devices were connected to the fragile child's body with professional efficiency. Doctors exchanged technical terms in urgent but controlled voices, while nurses moved in perfect choreography around the stretcher. Matthew clung even more tightly to Victoria's hand, terrified by the medical paraphernalia that now surrounded his little sister. The stretcher began to be pushed rapidly down a lit corridor, with Victoria and Matthew following closely, until they reached a restricted area where a serious-looking doctor, with graying hair at the temples, indicated they should wait outside. Matthew's eyes widened in panic at the prospect of being separated from his sister. "What are they doing to her? Why can't we stay?" asked the boy, tears flowing freely down his dirty face as he pulled Victoria's hand toward the doors through which Emma had disappeared. "What if she wakes up and doesn't see me? She'll be more scared." "They need to do tests and procedures to save your sister, Matthew," explained Victoria, kneeling to be at the boy's height, her hands holding his fragile shoulders with reassuring firmness. "We need to be strong for her now. I promise I won't let anything bad happen to you two." The hours that followed were a torture of waiting. Victoria and Matthew remained in the small room adjacent to the emergency area, she pacing back and forth, occasionally making calls and giving orders on her cell phone, while the boy remained seated, hunched in a chair too big for his size, his eyes never leaving the doors through which his sister had disappeared. The contrast between them was moving. The powerful businesswoman in her ruined dress and the small orphan in worn clothes, united by concern for a child who, for still mysterious reasons, seemed to connect their worlds so far apart. Nurses occasionally entered, offering water or asking if they needed anything, always directing curious glances at that unlikely pair. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, the grey-haired doctor returned, his tired face revealing the intensity of the battle they had fought in the last moments. "The girl is stabilized for now, but the situation is serious," explained the doctor, his eyes alternating between Victoria and the form in his hands. "Besides the trauma injuries, which include a moderate concussion and 2 fractured ribs, we discovered that she has a rare congenital heart condition that has been significantly aggravated by the physical and emotional trauma. We'll need to do more tests to determine the extent of the damage, but I can tell you that specialized surgery will be necessary soon. Do whatever is necessary, doctor." "Cost is not an issue," Victoria responded immediately, placing a protective hand on Matthew's shoulder. "This child will receive the best treatment this hospital can offer." In a corporate building downtown, Hannah walked nervously across the marble floor of her elegant meeting room. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, but she had no eyes for the beauty of the sunset, painting the sky in orange hues. Her assistant, Richard, A middle-aged man with a perpetually tired expression and an impeccable suit had just entered the room, carrying a folder of documents and a tablet. The tension was palpable. Hannah rarely showed anxiety, always maintaining a facade of calculated coldness, but something had clearly disturbed her usual composure. Her high heels marked a nervous rhythm on the floor as she repeatedly consulted her expensive wristwatch. When Richard finally showed her the photos captured by a paparazzo near the charity event, her face completely lost its color. The images showed Victoria putting two ragged children in her car with an expression of urgency. Out of context, they could easily suggest a kidnapping, but that wasn't what made Hannah gasp. It was the recognition of the children. "It's not possible. It can't be them," Hannah murmured, enlarging the image on the tablet to better see the children's faces. "How did they survive? The demolition should have been complete. No one should have been left to tell the story." "Ma'am, what should we do?" "Your sister took these children to the central hospital," informed Richard, his voice maintaining professional neutrality despite the gravity of the situation. "If she discovers the connection to the unauthorized demolition, and worse, if she finds out about Rebecca..." Hannah's face hardened, the momentary vulnerability giving way to cruel determination. With precise movements, she deleted the photos from the tablet and walked to a side table where she poured herself a generous dose of expensive whiskey. The amber liquid reflected the artificial light as she thoughtfully swirled it in the crystal glass, as if in it she could find the solution to her dilemma. Years building her parallel empire within her sister's company, manipulating contracts, diverting funds, cultivating strategic allies, everything could crumble if Victoria connected the dots. And now the children who should have disappeared along with the evidence were precisely under the protection of the only person from whom they needed to hide the truth. "Solve the problem, Richard." "I don't care how," Hannah finally ordered, her voice cold as the ice in her glass. "Those children cannot stay with my sister long enough to tell any story. Do you understand what needs to be done?" "Perfectly, Ma'am. I have a contact in social services who can issue an emergency custody order," replied Richard, already typing quickly on his cell phone. "In a few hours, the children will be in a state shelter where no one will find them." Back at the hospital, Matthew had finally fallen asleep on a sofa in the waiting room, exhausted after the trauma and tension of the last few hours. Victoria watched him, noting how even in sleep his small body remained tense, as if ready to jump and run at the slightest sign of danger, the survival instinct of someone who learned too early not to trust the world. With silent steps, she approached a large window overlooking the hospital's inner garden, taking from her pocket the angel-shaped medallion that had fallen from Emma's neck. Under the artificial light, she examined every detail of the object, confirming what her heart already knew. It was identical to the one James had commissioned years before. The symbol engraved on the back, a peculiar combination of intertwined initials with small stars, was unique. James had explained that it represented the eternal connection between souls destined to meet. He had given her a similar medallion, which Victoria still carried on a thin chain around her own neck, hidden beneath her clothes. How this object had come into that child's hands, and why had James never mentioned Rebecca or these children? "What secrets did you hide from me, James?" Victoria whispered to the locket, as if the metal could answer the questions that now tormented her mind. "Who are these children really to you?" "To us. They were the only gifts Mum never sold, even when we had nothing to eat." Matthew's voice startled Victoria, who hadn't noticed that the boy had awakened and silently approached. "She said the angel would protect us, that it was a promise someone made to her." Gradually sitting side by side on that hospital sofa, Matthew began to share fragments of his short life with Victoria. He told about the simple but love-filled home where they lived, about how Rebecca worked long hours as a house cleaner to support them, about the stories she told of the father who would one day return for them. He spoke of the village where they lived, of the tight-knit community that helped each other in difficult times. And then, with a choked voice, he described the horror of the previous night, the machines arriving without warning, houses being torn down, the screams of neighbors, and finally, his mother's disappearance under the rubble. When he mentioned the name of the village, Victoria felt as if the ground had disappeared beneath her feet. It was an area where her company had projects, but she was absolutely certain that no demolition was scheduled for that location. In fact, she clearly remembered denying Hannah's request to begin work there, arguing that they needed a proper relocation plan for the resident families. "What do you mean they demolished everything last night? There was no demolition scheduled for that area," Victoria said, more to herself than to Matthew, her brain frantically working to process the information. "My company didn't authorize this." "I didn't authorize this." "But it was your company, ma'am. The men wore helmets with your symbol, the same one that's on that big building downtown," Matthew replied, his childish eyes revealing wisdom beyond his years. "Mom even tried to show some papers saying we had the right to stay longer, but nobody would listen. While Emma was undergoing a battery of tests upstairs, Victoria used those hours to begin her own investigation. In a private room that the hospital director made available to her, she made dozens of calls. To the company's legal department, to the project sector, to contacts at City Hall. The answers she obtained only deepened the mystery. Officially, no demolition order had been issued. No team had been assigned to that area. However, an employee more loyal to her than to Hannah revealed in a confidential tone that he had seen strange documents passing through her sister's desk, signatures that seemed forged, closed-door meetings with people who weren't part of the company's regular staff. Each new piece of information was a puzzle piece that began to form a disturbing image. "I need all information about the village project right now," Victoria demanded on the phone, her voice recovering the authoritative tone of a CEO. "And I want to know who authorized any action in that area. If I discover that someone forged my signature, the consequences will be severe." "But ma'am, those documents are in the confidential archive of the Vice Presidency," replied the hesitant voice on the other end of the line. "Only your sister has direct access to them without special authorization." After a few hours, Emma was transferred to a private room in the pediatric wing, the best room available by Victoria's express order. The girl was stabilized, but still unconscious, connected to various machines monitoring her vital signs. Matthew refused to leave his sister's side, holding her small hand between his, occasionally whispering words of encouragement in her ear. Victoria observed the scene with a mixture of emotions: compassion for the children, anger at the injustice they had suffered, and a growing suspicion about her own sister's and company's involvement in the disaster. More disturbing still was the possible connection of these children to James. Could it be possible that her late husband had a secret family? That these were... No, it was absurd to even consider such a possibility. However, the locket in her pocket weighed like lead, a physical reminder that some secrets don't remain buried forever. "Miss Victoria?" called the doctor, entering the room with a grave expression. "We need to talk about Emma's condition. The tests revealed that she will need complex cardiac surgery in the next 48 hours. Your heart is significantly compromised, both by the congenital condition and the recent trauma. Make all necessary preparations, doctor." "Spare no resources," Victoria responded firmly, noticing how Matthew turned pale upon hearing the news. "This girl will have the best treatment possible, no matter the cost." The doctor hesitated, consulting his notes with an uncomfortable expression. Something clearly bothered him beyond the complexity of the medical case before him. Finally, after a long sigh, he decided to address the issue that had been hanging in the air from the beginning. "Ma'am, we need to discuss an important bureaucratic matter," he began, carefully choosing his words. "To perform any surgical procedure on a minor, we need authorization from parents or legal guardians. Given the circumstances, what exactly is your relationship with these children?" The question, though expected, caught Victoria momentarily off guard. What was her relationship with these children? Technically none. They were strangers that fate had placed in her path hours before. However, something deeper and inexplicable connected her to them. The medallion, the possible link to James, and above all, the moral responsibility she felt, especially if her company was somehow involved in the tragedy that had left them orphans. Before she could formulate an answer, the door to the room opened again, revealing a middle-aged man wearing a cheap suit and carrying a document folder. His expression was a studied mixture of professional sympathy and bureaucratic determination. "Excuse me, I'm Richard from Social Services," he announced, quickly presenting an official badge before tucking it into his inner jacket pocket. "I was informed about 2 children in an abandonment situation brought to this hospital. I've come to assume temporary state custody and arrange their transfer to an appropriate shelter as soon as the younger one is fit." "No!" shouted Matthew, jumping from his chair and positioning himself protectively between the man and Emma's bed. "We're not going to any shelter. We've heard stories about those places. We'd never see each other again." "Calm down, young man. The state will take good care of you," Richard said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Unfortunately, we have no choice. The law is clear when it comes to minors without legal guardians." Victoria observed the scene unfolding with a growing sense of distrust. There was something strangely familiar about this man, not in his face but in his posture, in his manner of speaking, and the speed with which he had appeared was, at the very least, suspicious. How had social services been informed so quickly about children who had arrived at the hospital just a few hours ago? Stepping forward, Victoria positioned herself between Richard and the children, her imposing presence filling the small hospital room. "These children are under my protection now," she declared, her voice leaving no room for discussion. "My lawyers are already arranging the necessary documents for emergency temporary guardianship. Until the legal process is completed, no one will take them anywhere." "Ma'am, with all due respect, there is no legal basis for such a guardianship claim," Richard replied, his polite tone barely disguising his irritation. "You have no relationship with these children. The standard procedure is clear in these cases." Before Victoria could respond, her cell phone vibrated in her pocket. An unknown number flashed on the screen. Normally she wouldn't answer unidentified calls, but something prompted her to press the green button. An electronically distorted voice sounded from the other end, sending chills down her spine. "These children are the price of your empire, ma'am. Ask your sister about Rebecca Williams." The line went dead immediately after the message, leaving Victoria paralyzed, her brain struggling to process the implication of those words. How did the caller know about Rebecca? And what was the connection to Hannah? Her reflections were abruptly interrupted by the most terrifying sound possible in that context, the shrill alarm of the monitors connected to Emma, indicating a sudden crisis. The girl, until then motionless in the hospital bed, was now arching her back in evident suffering, while the numbers on the cardiac monitor shot up to critical levels. "Code Blue, we need a resuscitation team here immediately," shouted the doctor, rushing to the patient's side as nurses flooded the room, pushing Victoria, Matthew and Richard aside. "Emma!" Matthew screamed, trying to reach his sister while being restrained by a nurse. "What's happening? Why is she like this? You said she was getting better. I need to stay with her, don't you understand? She's all I have left." Matthew's desperate cry echoed through the corridor as he was forced to leave the room so the medical team could work. Pushed into the hallway along with Matthew and Richard, Victoria now faced 2 simultaneous crises: the sudden deterioration of Emma's condition and the concrete threat that the children would be taken away by the supposed social worker. Her instinct told her something was wrong with Richard, that his appearance was not a coincidence, and the anonymous call only confirmed her suspicions that something much darker was at play. While watching the medical team working frantically through the room's window, her mind worked at equal speed, connecting the scattered dots: the medallion, James, Rebecca, the unauthorized demolition, Hannah, and now this supposed social worker appearing at the exact moment. Everything pointed to a carefully orchestrated conspiracy that was crumbling by the simple chance of Matthew finding her. "You're not from social services, are you?" Victoria confronted Richard in a low voice, so that Matthew, now sobbing while watching the doctors working, couldn't hear. "Who really sent you here? Was it my sister?" "I don't know what you're talking about, ma'am," Richard replied, but the slight tremor in his voice and the way he avoided her gaze revealed the truth. "I'm just fulfilling my duty to protect vulnerable children. If anything happens to that girl, if these children disappear into some convenient state shelter, I will use every penny of my fortune to uncover the truth," Victoria promised, her words carrying the weight of a threat she was fully capable of fulfilling. "And when I find out, there will be no place in this world where those responsible can hide." Victoria's imposing mansion, with its neoclassical architecture and meticulously kept gardens, had transformed into a fortress in the past 72 hours. Men in dark suits with discreet earpieces patrolled the perimeter, checking every vehicle that approached, while newly installed security cameras monitored every possible angle of the property. In the East Wing, traditionally reserved for distinguished guests, a private medical team now took shifts around the clock, monitoring Emma's vital signs, who had surprised all specialists by surviving emergency cardiac surgery. The girl had not yet fully regained consciousness, floating between moments of confused lucidity and long periods of drug-induced sleep. Not far from the room improvised as an intensive care unit, Matthew had received his own space. A spacious room with toys and children's books that Victoria had hastily ordered in an attempt to offer some normalcy to the traumatized child. The boy, however, rarely left his sister's side, sleeping in a reclining chair next to the hospital bed, holding Emma's small hand as if his touch could anchor the girl to the world of the living. "The doctors say she's responding well to the medications, but I still don't understand why she doesn't fully wake up," Victoria commented to the chief physician of the private team, her voice betraying the fatigue of sleepless nights. "It's been 3 days since the surgery. Shouldn't there be more significant progress? Pediatric patients with multiple trauma often enter this protective state. Her body and mind are healing at their own pace," the doctor explained patiently, adjusting the intravenous drip. "Your decision to bring her home was the right one. The hospital environment could prolong the psychological stress." In her private office on the ground floor of the mansion, Victoria spent hours poring over documents, calls, and virtual meetings, dividing her time between managing her business empire and the personal investigation she had initiated. Her side table was completely covered with folders, papers, and photographs, the preliminary work of private investigators she had hired to unravel the mystery behind the unauthorized demolition and Rebecca's fate. The deep circles under her eyes revealed the internal conflict consuming her, genuine concern for the children, painfully mingled with growing doubts about her late husband and increasingly concrete suspicions about Hannah's involvement. The mansion, which for years had been an almost empty space after James's death, now teemed with activity. Nurses, security guards, investigators, and at the center of it all, 2 children who had burst into her organized life like an unexpected storm, unearthing secrets she didn't know existed. "I've just received preliminary information about the woman, Rebecca," reported one of the investigators via video call, his serious face filling Victoria's laptop screen. "There are indications that she worked for your company approximately 8 years ago, but her employment file seems to have been intentionally removed from the official records. Keep digging. I want everything about her. Where she was born, where she studied, every job she's had, every place she's lived," Victoria ordered, massaging her temples to relieve the persistent headache. "And I want to know who authorized that demolition using my company's name." The sound of the doorbell echoed through the mansion, interrupting Victoria's reflections. Through the security monitor on her desk, she saw Hannah's elegant figure at the main gate, animatedly conversing with the security guards who clearly hesitated to allow her entry. Even from a distance, through the grainy image of the security camera, Victoria could perceive her sister's growing irritation. Hannah wasn't accustomed to being questioned, especially on the property she had freely entered and exited for years. For a brief moment, Victoria considered denying the visit, but quickly realized this was a valuable opportunity. To observe Hannah's reactions, probe what she knew, perhaps even induce her to reveal something in a moment of carelessness. With a sigh, she pressed the intercom button, authorizing her sister's entry, but not without first discreetly instructing the security guards to double their vigilance in the wing where the children were. "Dear sister, what a warm reception," Hannah exclaimed sarcastically upon entering Victoria's office, her high heels marking a confident rhythm on the marble floor. "Since when do I practically need to submit my DNA to enter your house? Those gorillas outside almost searched me." "Times have changed, Hannah. I have different responsibilities now," Victoria responded calmly, closely observing every micro-expression on her sister's face. "Would you like some tea? Or perhaps something stronger?" Hannah seemed the embodiment of elegance in her designer outfit, impeccably arranged hair and makeup that masterfully disguised any sign of stress. However, Victoria, who had grown up alongside this woman, could detect the subtle signs of tension. the way her fingers lightly drummed on her designer handbag, the smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, the slightly more rigid posture than usual. The sisters were like distorted reflections of each other. They shared similar facial features, inherited from the same parents, but where Victoria displayed a more natural and accessible beauty, Hannah cultivated an almost intimidating appearance in her perfection. The tension in the air was almost palpable as Hannah circulated around the office, apparently admiring the decorative objects, but Victoria noticed how her eyes continually drifted toward the documents scattered on the side table. "I came as soon as I heard you had brought those poor children home," Hannah commented, with a tone of false concern, accepting the glass of wine Victoria offered her. "The press is speculating wildly, you know. Some even suggest that you discovered James's secret children. Just imagine. How absurd." "It is absurd, isn't it?" Victoria replied, carefully observing her sister's reaction while pretending to ignore the provocation. "What intrigues me more is how that demolition happened under our company's name without my authorization. Strange, don't you think?" The two women stared at each other in a silent game of verbal chess, each carefully calculating the next move. Hannah finally sat down on the elegant sofa near the window, crossing her legs in a studiedly casual gesture, while her eyes quickly assessed the environment, as if looking for something, or someone. Victoria remained standing, subtly blocking her sister's view of the document table, aware that every minute of this conversation was an opportunity to obtain information, but also a calculated risk. The last rays of the afternoon sun came through the large windows, creating long shadows that seemed to dance between the two women, like the secrets that hovered unspoken between them. "Sister, your heart is big, but you can't save everyone," Hannah finally said, placing the wine glass on the center table with a delicate clink. "These children need a real family, not a busy businesswoman who barely has time for herself. I can recommend excellent institutions that would take proper care of them." "It's curious how interested you are in the fate of these specific children," observed Victoria, maintaining a conversational tone despite the growing suspicion inside her. "You've never shown such concern for the social causes I support." The tension hung in the air like electricity before a storm. Hannah rose with fluid, rehearsed movements, approaching Victoria with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. For a moment, the two sisters stood face to face, so similar in appearance, so different in essence. Hannah touched Victoria's arm in an apparently affectionate gesture, but there was something predatory in her gaze, something calculating that made Victoria resist the urge to step back. "I just worry about you, dear sister," Hannah whispered, her tone falsely sweet. "Since James left us, you've drowned yourself in work and philanthropy. I'm afraid these children are just another way to fill the void he left." "That wouldn't be fair to them, would it?" "I appreciate your concern, Hannah, but I can make my own decisions," Victoria replied firmly, subtly moving away from her sister's touch. "The children will stay with me until the legal situation is resolved. After all, our company seems to have some responsibility in this tragedy, don't you agree?" After Hannah's departure, which occurred amidst formal goodbyes and empty promises of help, Victoria remained by the window, watching her sister's luxurious car leave the property. The sense of imminent danger she had felt throughout the entire visit had not diminished. On the contrary, it had intensified. The way Hannah had casually asked about Emma's condition, the insistence on knowing details about the mansion's security, the attempts to discover what Victoria already knew, everything pointed to an interest that went far beyond fraternal concern. She was about to return to her documents when one of the security guards knocked on the door, announcing the arrival of the lead investigator Victoria had hired, a middle-aged man with a discreet appearance, the type of person who would easily go unnoticed in a crowd, exactly the quality that made him excellent at his job. He entered carrying a thick folder and a somber expression that anticipated disturbing news. "We found information that you need to see immediately," said the investigator without preamble, placing the folder on the table and opening it to reveal documents, photographs, and reports organized chronologically. "We managed to recover records that were deleted from the company's systems, as well as testimonies from former employees who worked with Rebecca Williams." "Tell me everything, omitting nothing," Victoria ordered, anxiety growing in her chest as she prepared to face potentially painful truths. Who was this woman really, and what was her connection to my company? And to my husband? The revelations came like successive blows, each more painful than the last. Rebecca Williams had been hired as a junior administrative assistant at Reynolds Enterprises a few years earlier, working mainly in the human resources department. According to the recovered records, she had been abruptly dismissed 8 years ago, supposedly for breach of confidentiality, but interviews with former colleagues revealed a different story. Rebecca had discovered irregularities in outsourcing contracts, documents with possibly forged signatures, and misappropriation of funds intended for social projects. When she tried to take her discoveries to her superiors, she was quickly silenced and fired, without any compensation. Most disturbing, however, was evidence that James had been deeply involved in the situation. Recovered emails showed that he had initially supported Rebecca, promising to protect her, followed by frequent meetings outside the workplace. Surveillance photographs showed the two together in discreet restaurants, hotel entrances, parks away from downtown, meetings that coincided exactly with periods when James told Victoria he was on business trips. The chronology suggests their relationship began professionally, when she reported the irregularities, but evolved into something personal, explained the investigator, pointing to a meticulously constructed timeline. Approximately 8 months after her dismissal, Rebecca gave birth to Matthew, and 3 years later Emma was born. "You mean my husband had a parallel family for years while still married to me?" asked Victoria, her voice choked with the pain of betrayal that even years after James's death still had the power to tear her heart apart. "How did I never notice anything?" The tears Victoria had been fighting so hard to contain finally streamed down her face as she flipped through the irrefutable evidence of a double life her husband had maintained. Photographs of James with Rebecca, with a baby who could only be Matthew, documents of a small house purchased in the name of a shell company that belonged to James, receipts of monthly bank transfers to an account in Rebecca's name. The pain of betrayal mixed with confusion. The man portrayed in this evidence seemed like a stranger, not the husband she thought she knew so well. And yet the most disturbing part was that in all the photographs with Rebecca and the children, James looked genuinely happy, in a way Victoria had rarely witnessed in their last years together. "There's one more thing, ma'am," continued the investigator hesitantly, as if afraid to deliver the final blow. "We found indications that shortly before his death, James consulted lawyers about changes to his will. He apparently planned to include Rebecca and the children as beneficiaries, potentially dividing his personal fortune. That would explain why Hannah is so determined to keep these children away from me," muttered Victoria, the pieces of the puzzle finally fitting together. "If James really changed his will, and if these children are legally recognized as his..." Miles away in Hannah's private office, a very different scene was unfolding. With frantic movements, she fed a paper shredder with documents that incriminated her participation in the illegal demolition. The spacious room, decorated in shades of grey and black that reflected her cold personality, was in an unusual state of disorder. Open folders, pulled drawers, documents scattered across the imposing desk. Her usual control had given way to growing panic since Richard had returned from the hospital without the children, reporting that Victoria had interfered with their plans. The subsequent news that the businesswoman had transferred the children to her own mansion, surrounding them with security guards and private doctors, only intensified her anxiety. Hannah knew it was only a matter of time until Victoria discovered the truth, or at least parts of it. But there were deeper, darker secrets that she was determined to keep buried at any cost. The demolition documents have been completely destroyed, and the main executors have already left the country with new identities, as arranged, informed Richard, who watched his boss with an expression of growing concern. "But there's another piece of news you need to know. They found Rebecca's body in the rubble this morning." "Finally, some good news," replied Hannah, momentarily pausing the process of destroying evidence. "Without her, it will just be the word of 2 children against mine. No one can connect this to us. Take care of the medical examiner. Make sure the cause of death is simply recorded as an accident during the demolition." "I've already arranged that, but there's another problem," continued Richard, hesitant to deliver more disturbing news. The investigators hired by your sister are digging deep. They've recovered emails and documents we thought had been permanently deleted from the company servers. Hannah's face visibly paled. With an abrupt movement, she turned off the paper shredder and walked to the bar in the corner of the room, pouring herself a generous shot of whiskey, which she drank in a single gulp. Her calculating mind was already evaluating scenarios, estimating damages, looking for exits. The plan had been perfect in its simplicity. Discover James's intentions to change his will, eliminate the obstacle he represented with a carefully orchestrated car accident, and then patiently wait for Victoria, consumed by grief, to eventually pass more control of the company to her. Everything was going according to plan until Rebecca reappeared, threatening to reveal everything with evidence she had kept for years, including, apparently, a new will that James had secretly signed. "Rebecca came to me 3 months ago, you know," Hannah revealed to Richard, her eyes reflecting the coldness of her heart as she poured herself another shot. She said she had proof that James, before dying, had changed his will to include his other family. She demanded an absurd amount to keep the secret, threatening to approach Victoria if I didn't pay. "And did you pay?" asked Richard, although he already suspected the answer. "Of course not," replied Hannah with a cruel smile. "Why waste money when there are more?" "Permanent?" Demolition would solve everything at once. It would eliminate Rebecca, the evidence she possessed, and those irritating children who could one day claim what is rightfully mine. Back at Victoria's mansion, the air heavy with revelations hung over the office as the investigator withdrew, promising to continue seeking more evidence, particularly about the will that James had possibly altered. Alone with her thoughts, Victoria struggled to process everything she had discovered: James's betrayal, the possible paternity of the children, Hannah's increasingly evident involvement in a conspiracy that had resulted in death and destruction. The pain of marital betrayal, however, gradually gave way to growing determination. Regardless of how she felt about James and his choices, the children were innocent in this story. If they really were her late husband's children, if James had really tried to protect them through an altered will, then she had a moral responsibility toward them. "I need to speak with Matthew," she murmured to herself, rising with renewed determination. If there is more evidence of James's paternity, the boy might have knowledge of it. Victoria found Matthew where she expected, sitting beside Emma's bed, reading aloud to his sleeping sister from a storybook that one of the nurses had brought. The scene was moving in its simplicity. A boy who had faced more tragedy in his few years of life than many adults faced in decades, still finding strength to care for his little sister. For a moment, Victoria hesitated at the door, reluctant to disturb that moment of peace, but the need for answers propelled her forward. With soft steps, she entered the room and sat in the armchair on the other side of the bed, observing how Matthew's eyes lifted from the book to meet hers, eyes that, now that she knew what to look for, seemed painfully familiar in their shape and expression. "Matthew, I need to ask you some questions about your father," Victoria began gently, carefully choosing her words. "Did your mother talk about him? Do you have any memories, any photographs?" The boy slowly closed the book, a shadow passing over his young face. For a long moment he just stared at Victoria, as if assessing whether he could trust her with his most precious memories. Finally, with a small sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the world, he stood up and went to the small worn backpack he had brought with him, one of the few objects rescued from the rubble of his home. From an internal pocket, carefully protected in an improvised plastic envelope, he removed a faded photograph with edges crumpled from being handled so much. With almost reverent movements, he handed it to Victoria. "Mom kept this photo like a treasure," Matthew explained, his voice small but firm. "She showed it to us every night before bed, saying that our father loved us very much, but couldn't be with us because he had complicated responsibilities." Victoria's heart seemed to stop for a moment when her eyes fell on the image. There was no possible doubt. The man in the photograph, embracing a visibly younger and smiling Rebecca, was unequivocally James. Her husband, exactly as she remembered him, with the same smile that had won her heart so many years ago. The date printed in the corner of the photograph indicated it had been taken approximately 8 years ago, when he was still married to her, while living a double life she had never suspected. The physical evidence in her hands made real what until then was just a painful suspicion, and Victoria struggled to control the storm of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her in front of the child. "Do you have any other memories of him?" "Did he visit you?" asked Victoria, trying to keep her voice steady despite the internal turmoil. "He would come visit us when he could, always bringing gifts," Matthew replied, a small smile forming as he recalled happy memories. "He taught me to play chess and used to tell us stories before bedtime. Mom always said he died because someone didn't want him to be with us, that it was an accident, but not really an accident." The boy's words struck Victoria like lightning. James's death had been officially classified as a terrible car accident, brakes that failed on a winding road, resulting in a fatal fall from a cliff. At the time, consumed by grief, she had never questioned the official version. But now, in light of the new discoveries, disturbing memories emerged. Hannah consoling her at the funeral, quickly assuming responsibilities in the company, subtly directing decisions while Victoria was emotionally fragile. Would her own sister have been capable of something so monstrous? "What did your mother mean by that, Matthew?" asked Victoria, leaning closer, her heart racing with the terrible possibility that was beginning to form in her mind. "Did she say who might not want your father to be with you?" Before Matthew could answer, a movement on the hospital bed caught both their attention. Emma, who had remained in a semi-conscious state for days, stirred slightly, her eyes struggling to open. Matthew immediately jumped from his chair, grabbing his sister's hand with an expression of hope and relief. Victoria approached from the other side of the bed, watching attentively as the girl blinked in confusion, her eyes gradually focusing on her surroundings. When her gaze finally fixed on Victoria, something extraordinary happened. A glimmer of recognition lit up the childlike eyes, despite never having met Victoria, before Emma lost consciousness. "Daddy said you were an angel, and that one day you would save us," whispered Emma, her voice almost inaudible after days without use, but her words perfectly clear and disconcerting. "He used to show us your picture." Victoria's world seemed to stop in that moment, the girl's words echoing in her mind like a distant bell. James had spoken about her to his other children. Had he nurtured hopes that one day they could all be united? The implications were overwhelming, not only emotionally, but also in terms of what they meant for Hannah's subsequent actions. If James had really altered his will to include Rebecca and the children, if he had planned to reveal their existence to Victoria, the motive to eliminate him became crystal clear. While Victoria absorbed the impact of these revelations, completely focused on the children in front of her, none of the three noticed the figure moving silently through the corridors of the mansion. Hannah, who knew the property as well as her own home, had used a rarely used side entrance, a service access whose existence only the two sisters had known since childhood. Dressed entirely in black, moving with the precision of someone who had carefully planned each step, she glided through the shadows of the corridors, skillfully avoiding the security guards positioned at strategic points. In her right hand, a carefully prepared syringe contained a lethal dose of medication that, in an already fragile child like Emma, would appear to be merely a sad but expected medical complication. Hannah knew she needed to act quickly. Her previous visit to the mansion had been merely a reconnaissance, allowing her to assess the security and precisely locate the room where the girl was being treated. Now, with the conversation she had briefly witnessed between Victoria and the investigator, she understood that her time was running out. If she didn't eliminate the children, the only living witnesses who could confirm her role in the tragedy, everything she had worked for would be lost. "No one will take what is rightfully mine," Hannah whispered to herself, approaching the door of the room where she knew she would find Emma, Matthew, and possibly her sister. "Not even you, dear sister." The library of Victoria's mansion remained immersed in a comforting dimness. Only the soft light of an antique lamp illuminated the environment, filled with books from floor to ceiling. There, sitting in a worn leather armchair, James's favorite, Victoria tried to process the words she had just heard from Emma's mouth. Her eyes fixed on emptiness, while her mind revisited years of her marriage under a completely new light. The wall clock ticked mercilessly, each second echoing like a hammer in her conscience. James, the man she believed she knew deeply, had built a parallel life, with another family, other children. The frequent business trips, the mysterious phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room, the gradual emotional distancing of recent years. Everything now made terrible sense. Matthew had taken his sister back to the room after their brief conversation, insisting that she needed to rest, leaving Victoria alone with her devastating memories and doubts. She held the angel-shaped medallion between trembling fingers, turning it repeatedly, as if the object could finally reveal all the secrets it kept. "How could I have been so blind for so many years?" she murmured to herself, the pain of betrayal as fresh as if it had happened that day and not years ago. "And why, James? Why didn't you trust me enough to tell me the truth?" Hannah moved like a shadow through the corridors of the mansion she had known since childhood. Your silent steps, calculated, skillfully avoided the floorboards that might creak under your weight. The syringe in your hand was protected by a small sterile cap containing a lethal mixture that would simulate a natural heart failure, especially in an already debilitated child like Emma. Your plan was simple: eliminate the girl first, then find a way to get rid of her brother. With the children dead, the last witnesses and potential heirs would disappear, and with them, any threat to the empire you had coveted for so long. When passing through a side corridor, you froze momentarily upon hearing approaching voices, 2 security guards making their rounds. You pressed yourself against the wall in a dark niche, holding even your breath as the men passed so close you could have touched their uniforms. When the sound of their footsteps finally disappeared, Hannah allowed herself a small smile of triumph. She had correctly calculated the intervals between rounds and knew exactly how much time she had to complete her mission before the security guards returned to that wing of the house. Poor fools, trained to protect against external intruders, never suspecting that the real danger is already inside, she thought, feeling the adrenaline of the hunt course through her body. No security system in the world can protect you from someone who already knows all your secrets. The investigator's arrival at the library interrupted Victoria's dark thoughts. The man, normally so composed, displayed clear signs of agitation, his forehead shiny with sweat, his breathing slightly labored like someone who had just made a significant discovery. Without initial words, he placed a folder on the center table and connected his tablet to a portable projector, casting images on the free wall between 2 bookshelves. The first was an enlarged photograph of the angel-shaped medallion, identical to the one Victoria was holding at that moment. Beside it, documents from a traditional jewelry store showed the specialized order made by James years ago, not for 1, but for 3 identical medallions. The investigator advanced to the next image, the official autopsy report for James after the fatal accident. With a precise movement of his finger on the tablet screen, he highlighted specific sections of the document, circling technical inconsistencies that would easily go unnoticed by untrained eyes. The fracture patterns didn't completely correspond to the type of impact reported. Traces of a strange substance were found in the brake system, but never properly investigated. The position of the body at the accident site suggested that James might have been unconscious even before the fall. "This medallion is not just a piece of jewelry, Miss Victoria," explained the investigator, pointing to the object she still held. "It was part of a set that James had specially made. One for you, another for Rebecca, and a third that, according to the jewelry store records, would be for the future. And as for the accident, these inconsistencies in the report strongly suggest it was premeditated." "Are you telling me that James was murdered?" asked Victoria, her voice almost unrecognizable from shock as she rose from the armchair in a sudden movement. "And that someone deliberately covered it up?" The sudden noise coming from the corridor leading to Emma's room cut the conversation like a sharp blade. It was a muffled sound, like something heavy falling onto carpet, followed by an even more alarming silence. Victoria's instincts immediately fired. In seconds, she was running down the corridor, the investigator at her heels. The sound had come precisely from the direction of the room where Emma was recovering, where Matthew was probably also located. Her heart hammered in her chest with a terrible premonition as she covered the last few meters separating her from the room. The door was ajar, a disturbing detail, as she knew the nurse always kept it closed for medical protocols. As she pushed it completely open, the scene that revealed itself froze the blood in her veins. Hannah, dressed entirely in black, was leaning over Emma's bed with a syringe positioned directly above the intravenous tube. Matthew was lying on the floor, apparently unconscious, the source of the noise they had heard. "What are you doing?" shouted Victoria, her voice reverberating off the walls of the room as she advanced toward her sister. "Get away from her right now, Hannah." "You arrived just in time to say goodbye, dear sister," replied Hannah, showing no surprise, as if she had anticipated the interruption. 1 minute later, and your precious protégé would have already had a regrettable medical complication. The confrontation that followed seemed to happen in slow motion for Victoria. Hannah, realizing her immediate plan was compromised, backed away from the bed, but kept the syringe in a threatening position, her eyes calculating escape routes while the investigator blocked the door. The room, previously an environment of healing and recovery, had transformed into a battlefield where the air vibrated with almost palpable tension. Emma, still too weak to fully comprehend the danger, observed the scene with frightened eyes, while Matthew began to regain consciousness on the floor, bringing his hand to his head, where a bruise was already beginning to form. Victoria moved strategically, positioning herself between Hannah and the children, her eyes never leaving her sister's. What she saw in that gaze deeply disturbed her. There was no fear or remorse, only cold determination, constant calculation, as if all this was merely a chess game where sacrifices were inevitable to achieve the ultimate goal. "Why, Hannah?" asked Victoria, trying to buy time while assessing how to disarm her sister without putting the children at even greater risk. "These are just innocent children. What could they possibly have done to deserve this?" "Innocent? Perhaps," Hannah replied with a cold smile, her mask of civility finally crumbling completely. "But they are heirs, Victoria. Heirs who threaten everything I've worked for over the years." The truth began to pour from Hannah like poison from a long-infected wound. Her voice, once always controlled and silky, now oscillated between tones of contained anger and bitter resentment. Moving around the room like a caged animal, she revealed a monologue that exposed decades of envy and manipulation. Since childhood, she had always lived in her older sister's shadow, Victoria, the smart one, Victoria, the responsible one, Victoria, the parents' favorite. While Victoria legitimately built her business empire, Hannah wove a web of lies and diversions behind the scenes, creating a parallel system of corruption that enriched her at her sister's expense. James had accidentally discovered her manipulations, threatening to expose her. That's when Hannah began to manipulate him too, discovering his vulnerability, the extramarital affair with Rebecca, and using this information to initially blackmail him. What she didn't expect was that James would develop genuine feelings for the other woman, to the point of wanting to publicly acknowledge the relationship and the children. That idealistic idiot believed you would forgive him, that you would agree to share everything with that insignificant woman and her bastards. Hannah practically spat the words, her eyes shining with fury repressed for years. He was going to confess everything, drafted a new will, planned to bring those children into our lives. Everything that should be ours, that should be mine. "So you killed him," Victoria stated, not as a question, but as a terrible realization. "Your own brother-in-law, father of the children you now try to murder. How far does your greed go, Hannah?" The moment of clarity was devastating for Victoria. James hadn't simply betrayed. He was planning to do the right thing, confess, take responsibility. And for that, her own sister had permanently silenced him. The same blood that ran in her veins flowed in Hannah's, and yet the woman before her seemed a complete stranger, a monster without remorse or compassion. While processing this revelation, Victoria noticed from the corner of her eye that Matthew had managed to quietly stand up and now heard every word of that terrible confession. The boy's face transformed as he understood that he was facing his father's murderer, the woman responsible for all the years of suffering and deprivation, for his mother's recent death, and now for the attempt to kill his little sister. "It was you who killed my father?" Matthew's childish voice cut through the air like a blade, carrying a pain and anger that no child should be capable of expressing. "It was you who knocked down our house and hurt my mother?" "Matthew, no," shouted Victoria, realizing the danger a second too late. The boy launched himself toward Hannah with the impulsive force of pain transformed into action. His small fists raised, tears of anger streaming down his face. He was the embodiment of childish justice in its purest and most reckless form. Hannah, surprised by the sudden movement, turned to face the boy, the syringe still in her hand. Her expression revealed that she would not hesitate to carry out her plan, regardless of who stood in her way. Victoria moved by pure maternal instinct, throwing herself between Hannah and Matthew, receiving the impact of the small body against hers while simultaneously pushing her sister's armed hand away. What followed was a chaotic struggle, Victoria trying simultaneously to protect Matthew and disarm Hannah, the investigator running to help, Emma weakly screaming from the hospital bed. "You always have to be the heroine, don't you?" hissed Hannah, fighting to maintain control of the syringe while struggling against Victoria's grip. "Always the perfect one, the savior, everyone's favorite." "This isn't about me, Hannah. These are children of the man you killed," Victoria replied, her voice strangled by the effort of the physical struggle. "When did you become this monster I don't recognize?" The struggle intensified when Hannah, realizing she was gradually losing the advantage, became even more violent and desperate. Her movements no longer had the calculated precision of before. Now they were frantic, dangerous, fueled by the panic of someone watching their world crumble. In a moment of distraction, when Victoria turned to push Matthew away from danger, Hannah managed to free her arm from her sister's grip. With a sudden movement, she lunged with the syringe toward Victoria, determined to complete her plan. What happened next was almost too quick to be comprehended by those present. The investigator managed to grab Hannah's wrist at the last moment, diverting the trajectory of the syringe. The abrupt movement caused her to lose balance. In the subsequent confusion, the needle ended up piercing Hannah's own arm, injecting the lethal substance she had prepared for Emma. The horror of understanding immediately mirrored itself on the villain's face, who looked at her own arm as if she couldn't believe what had happened. "No, it can't be. Not like this," stammered Hannah, the effects of the substance already beginning to manifest as she staggered backward, knocking over medical equipment. "It wasn't supposed to end this way." "What? What was in that syringe?" asked Victoria, genuine horror in her voice as she rushed to activate the emergency button on the wall, calling the medical team. "Hannah, what have you done?" The following minutes were a whirlwind of frantic activity. The medical team burst into the room, dividing themselves between checking on Emma and attending to Hannah, who was already showing alarming symptoms: dilated pupils, shallow breathing, irregular heartbeats. Victoria held Matthew firmly against herself, protecting him from the terrible sight, while paramedics worked to stabilize Hannah enough to transport her to the hospital. The investigator quickly explained the situation to the head of security, who immediately called the police. Amid the chaos, something fell from Hannah's pocket when the paramedics transferred her to the stretcher: the angel-shaped medallion she had evidently stolen from Emma during her first attempt to attack her. Victoria mechanically picked it up from the floor, immediately noticing that it looked slightly different from the other two she knew. It was the third medallion, the one James had commissioned for the future. "I need to stay with Ms. Victoria," insisted Matthew when a nurse tried to take him to another room. "I need to protect my sister. I promised my mother I would always take care of her." "You're not going anywhere, Matthew," Victoria assured, hugging the boy tightly. "You two are safe now, I promise. No one will ever hurt you again." Hours later, when the initial storm had passed, Victoria sat in her library again, the third medallion now in her hands. Emma was stable, sleeping under the constant care of doctors, with Matthew finally convinced to rest on a sofa beside his sister's bed, exhausted by the traumatic events. Hannah had been taken to the hospital in critical condition under police custody. The house, now reinforced with additional security, had returned to a tense calm. Carefully examining the medallion in the lamplight, Victoria noticed something that wasn't present in the other two: a small, almost imperceptible crack on the edge. Pressing it gently, the medallion opened like a locket, revealing not a photograph as would be expected, but a tiny flash drive carefully inserted into a customized compartment. "What did you hide here, James?" murmured Victoria, removing the device with trembling fingers and inserting it into her laptop. "What secrets still need to come to light?" The computer screen lit up with the single folder contained on the flash drive, simply titled "The Truth." Inside there were several scanned documents: James's updated will, bank records, evidence of suspicious transactions carried out by Hannah, printed emails. But what immediately caught Victoria's attention was a video file titled For Victoria. Watch first. With her heart racing, she double-clicked the file and adjusted the volume down, aware of the children sleeping not far away. James's image filled the screen, older and more tired than in her last memories of him, as if carrying an invisible weight. From the scenery behind him, Victoria recognized the office of a hotel where he frequently stayed during business trips. The date in the corner of the video indicated it had been recorded just 3 days before his death. "Victoria, my love, if you're watching this, it means I've failed," James began, his voice conveying a mixture of resignation and determination. "Failed as a husband, as a father, and perhaps even as a human being. But I need you to know the whole truth before judging me completely." What followed was a complete and detailed confession. James explained how he met Rebecca during an internal investigation he was secretly conducting, after noticing discrepancies in the company's financial reports. Rebecca, then an employee in the accounting department, had been the first to notice and document irregularities, especially in projects supervised by Hannah. What began as a professional partnership eventually evolved into a personal involvement, the only part of the story for which James took full responsibility without excuses. He explained how Hannah discovered the affair, and more importantly, the investigation he was conducting against her. Instead of immediately exposing him to Victoria, Hannah chose to use the information as blackmail, forcing him to cover up her illicit activities in the company in exchange for silence about his extramarital affair. More disturbing still, James revealed that Hannah had actively worked to sabotage his marriage with Victoria for years, manipulating information, creating conflicts, always with the ultimate goal of gaining more control over the company. "She's not just ambitious, Victoria. She's dangerous," James warned, his face tense with genuine concern. "When she discovered I was planning to confess everything to you, publicly acknowledge my children with Rebecca, and expose her crimes in the company, her threats became explicit. I fear not only for myself, but for Rebecca and the children." The recording continued with James detailing the evidence he had gathered against Hannah over the years, all stored on the same flash drive, properly organized in folders. He explained that he had recently altered his will to include Matthew and Emma as his legitimate heirs, and that he planned to tell Victoria the whole truth personally the following week. He genuinely believed that despite the initial pain, Victoria, with her innate sense of justice and compassion, would eventually accept the children into her life. The video concluded with words that pierced Victoria's heart like arrows. "Victoria, if you're seeing this, I failed to protect my other family. Please, find my children before Hannah destroys them as she tried to destroy me. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I know what I did is unforgivable. But I ask you to protect these innocent children. They are part of me, just as you will always be the great love of my life, despite my mistakes." Silent tears ran down Victoria's face as the recording ended. The truth, finally revealed in all its painful complexity, didn't bring the comfort of resolution, but the weight of new responsibilities. James hadn't simply been a traitor. He had been a victim and an accomplice simultaneously, trapped in a web of his own making, but also manipulated by Hannah's relentless ambition. The pain of betrayal was still there, but now mingled with a deeper understanding of the circumstances that produced it. And more importantly, there were 2 children sleeping not far away, James's children, innocent in all this adult drama of greed, manipulation, and power, who now depended on her for their survival and well-being. "I promise, James," Victoria whispered to the now dark screen, her words carrying the weight of a solemn oath. "They will be safe with me always. This is the only forgiveness I can offer now." In the hospital, far from the mansion where so many secrets had been revealed, Hannah lay in an intensive care unit bed. Machines monitored her vital signs, tubes and wires connected to her motionless body. The doctors had managed to stabilize her, against all expectations, but she remained in an induced coma, the only state that would allow her body to fight against the toxin she herself had prepared with such meticulousness. A police officer stood guard outside the room, ensuring that should she survive, she would answer for her numerous crimes. The silent room, illuminated only by the lights of medical equipment, seemed light years away from the halls of power where Hannah had reigned for so long. And then, contrary to all medical prognoses, Her eyelids trembled slightly. The fingers of her right hand moved almost imperceptibly over the hospital sheet. Her eyes opened slowly, unfocused initially, but gradually gaining clarity. When they finally fixed on the opposite wall, there was no confusion or disorientation in them, only cold, calculating hatred, the unwavering determination of someone who did not yet consider the battle lost. Hannah was back, and in her eyes shone the silent promise of revenge. "It's not over, Victoria." Her lips formed the words silently, without emitting sound. "This is just beginning." Victoria's mansion garden, once an impeccably maintained but rarely used space, had completely transformed over the past 6 months. Where sophisticated sculptures and formal floral arrangements once dominated, now thrived play areas, a small maze of animal-shaped shrubs and colorful beds planted by children's hands. On that sunny spring afternoon, the space vibrated with cheerful music, children's laughter, and the lively buzz of an intimate but significant celebration, Emma's birthday. Colorful balloons danced in the gentle breeze, attached to each chair of the long table decorated with wildflowers and a white lace tablecloth. In the center, a modest but beautifully decorated cake awaited the moment for candles, adorned with the figure of an angel, a symbol that had gained new meaning for this forming family. Victoria, wearing a simple but elegant dress, very different from the executive suits that previously defined her public image, observed with a serene smile while Matthew helped Emma feed the little fish in the new ornamental pond. The transformation wasn't just of the garden or house, which now displayed framed children's drawings alongside valuable artwork, but mainly of Victoria, whose eyes, once consumed by work and solitude, now shone with renewed purpose. "I never imagined this house could become a real home, full of laughter and life," Victoria confessed to her lawyer, who observed the scene with visible admiration. "People say I saved these children, but the truth is they saved me from an empty existence." The months following Hannah's failed attempt had been intense and transformative. Victoria vividly recalled the countless hours in courts, facing bureaucracy and prejudice to secure custody of the children. The public revelation that they were James's children had caused a momentary scandal, fueled by the sensationalist press. But Victoria faced everything with unwavering dignity, protecting the children from exposure while fighting for their rights. Using evidence left by James and the recorded testimony, she not only obtained temporary custody, but also initiated criminal proceedings against everyone involved in Hannah's schemes, including Richard, who eventually accepted a deal to testify against his former boss. Hannah's trial had been one of the most notorious in recent years, revealing a network of corruption, manipulation and crimes that extended far beyond what Victoria initially suspected. The conviction on multiple charges, including premeditated homicide, attempted murder and large-scale corporate fraud, resulted in a sentence that, in practice, meant Hannah would spend the rest of her life alternating between prison and psychiatric institutions, to which she was transferred after exhibiting unstable behavior during detention. "It was the most difficult trial of my career, but seeing these children now happy and safe made every legal battle worthwhile," commented the lawyer, enjoying the natural juice Victoria had personally prepared. "You transformed a tragedy into redemption, not just for them, but for James's legacy too. This is just the beginning of the journey. We still have much to heal, much to build together," replied Victoria, her gaze fixed on the children now running across the lawn, Emma finally strong enough to play like any healthy child. While observing the celebration unfold, Victoria couldn't help but let her mind travel to the crucial moments of the past months that had solidified this unlikely new family. She recalled the first visit she made, along with the children, to the demolished village where they once lived with Rebecca. Among the rubble that had not yet been completely removed, Matthew guided her to the exact location where their humble house once stood. Victoria would never forget the boy's expression, a mixture of pain and determination beyond his years, as he collected a fragment of colored tile, the only object he managed to recover from what had been his home. That same day, standing among the destruction indirectly caused by her own company, Victoria made a decision that would change not only the future of that community, but also the direction of her business. It wouldn't be enough to simply rebuild Rebecca's house. The entire village deserved to rise again, better and safer, as a monument to the woman who, despite never having known her personally, had become an important part of her own redemption story. "I promise that no one else will lose their home or family because of corporate greed," Victoria had declared that day, holding Matthew and Emma's small hands as they watched the first tractors arrive, this time not to destroy, but to prepare the ground for a new community. "We'll build something that would make your mother proud, a place where other families can grow in safety and dignity." The guests for the small celebration began to gather around the table as Victoria lit the candles on the cake. There weren't many people. The lawyer who had tirelessly fought for the case, the investigator who had discovered the crucial evidence, the doctor who had cared for Emma during her recovery, and some children from Matthew's new school, accompanied by their parents. An intimate gathering, exactly as Victoria had planned, focused on the emotional well-being of the children, who were still adapting to their new life. Emma, wearing a sky-blue dress that made her eyes look even more vibrant, smiled shyly at the guests while adjusting the small flower crown that Victoria had woven into her hair that morning. Matthew, more reserved, but visibly more relaxed than in the first months after the tragedy, stayed close to his sister, as if his role as protector was still essential, even in moments of celebration. The transformation of the children was as remarkable as that of the house. Emma was now a healthy girl, with rosy cheeks that bore no resemblance to the child on the brink of death that Victoria had found on that fateful night. Matthew, though still carrying a premature maturity in his eyes, had rediscovered the ability to smile and occasionally to simply be a child. "Emma, my love, it's time to make a wish and blow out the candles," Victoria called tenderly, motioning for the girl to come closer. "Remember, the most sincere wish from the heart is the one most likely to come true." "But I don't need to wish for anything. I already have everything I wanted," replied Emma, with a wisdom that frequently surprised Victoria, before leaning in to whisper, "But I'll make a wish anyway to ensure we'll stay together forever." After the cake was cut and distributed, Victoria asked for everyone's attention for a special announcement. With the children by her side, she formally revealed the significant changes she had implemented in her professional and personal life. In the months following the discovery of Hannah's crimes, Victoria had made radical decisions that shocked the corporate world. She sold the majority of her shares in the company she had built with such effort, keeping only a minority stake that would ensure financial stability for the children in the future. With the capital obtained, she created the Rebecca Foundation, dedicated to helping families in vulnerable situations, with special focus on single mothers and orphan children. The foundation would not only fund the complete reconstruction of the destroyed village, transforming it into a model of sustainable community with a school, medical center, and cultural spaces, but would also implement similar programs in other underprivileged areas. While explaining the details of the project, Victoria noticed the surprised expressions of Matthew and Emma, who still didn't know that the foundation would bear their mother's name. "Your mother and father taught me through you that the true value of life isn't in what we possess, but in the love we share," explained Victoria, kneeling to be at the children's height while holding their hands. "The Rebecca Foundation will be a constant reminder that even from the most painful moments, opportunities to do good can arise." "Mom would be so happy," Emma murmured, her eyes shining with unshed tears as she squeezed Victoria's hand. "She always said that good people exist in the world. We just need to find them." After the announcement, a more solemn and significant moment followed. Victoria guided the children and guests to a special area of the garden where 2 small marble plaques had been installed, near a space prepared for planting. It was a symbolic ceremony, a memorial for Rebecca and James, carefully planned to help the children in the grieving process that, amid the chaos of traumatic events, they hadn't had an adequate chance to experience. With kindness, Victoria explained the importance of acknowledging the pain of loss in order to move forward, emphasizing that remembering with love those who had departed was a way of keeping them present in their hearts. To everyone's surprise, it was Matthew who stepped forward first, kneeling before the plaque bearing his mother's name. His small hands touched the cold marble while tears, long contained by the effort to appear strong for his sister, finally found freedom to flow. It was the first time the boy had allowed himself to cry openly since the tragedy, a crucial step in his emotional healing process. "I miss you so much, Mum," sobbed Matthew, his small shoulders shaking with the force of emotion repressed for months. "I promised I would take care of Emma, and I'm keeping that promise, but I still wish you were here to see." "She sees, my dear, I'm sure she does," replied Victoria, kneeling beside him and enveloping him in an embrace that he, for the first time, fully returned, allowing himself to be comforted like the child he still was. "And she's very proud of the amazing and brave boy you are." The ceremony continued with Emma being helped to plant a small tree sapling between the two commemorative plaques. The choice of species was not random. It was a cherry tree, which in the future would bloom in spring during the girl's birthday season, symbolizing rebirth and the continuity of life even after the most painful losses. The image of Emma with her small hands stained with soil, determined to do everything right so the tree would grow strong, deeply moved everyone present. Victoria explained that as the years passed, the tree would grow along with them, its roots deepening into the soil just as love and memories would take root in their hearts. The cherry tree would be a living reminder that, just as nature renews itself after each winter, people can also bloom again after periods of darkness and pain. "When this tree blossoms, we'll have a picnic underneath it," declared Emma, with the absolute certainty of children, patting the soil around the sapling with care. "And we'll tell stories about Mom and Dad, so we never forget them." "It's a promise, my love," agreed Victoria, helping her finalize the planting. "And each spring when it blooms, we'll celebrate not only your birthday, but also our rebirth as a family." The celebration continued with games and music, the children gradually returning to the natural joy of the occasion after the emotionally intense moment. Victoria observed everything with a feeling of gratitude she had never imagined possible a few months before. The path had not been easy. The children still had occasional nightmares, moments of deep sadness and doubts about their place in the world. Matthew, in particular, had taken time to fully trust Victoria, testing boundaries and maintaining an understandable reserve after so many traumatic losses. There had been consultations with child psychologists, sleepless nights, calming cries of longing, and moments of uncertainty when Victoria questioned her ability to be the mother these children deserved. But there were also small daily victories. Matthew's first genuine smile after winning a chess match against her, the first time Emma fell asleep peacefully without fear of not waking up, the day she realized the children no longer anxiously checked if there would be enough food for the next meal. Trust had been built patiently day by day, promise by promise kept. "I never thought I could love children who weren't biologically mine with such intensity," Victoria commented to the doctor who had cared for Emma, watching the children play. "Now I understand that motherhood has much more to do with the heart than with blood. You gave them security and love when they needed it most, and they brought purpose to your life," the doctor wisely replied. "Sometimes the strongest families are those forged in adversity, not simply born of convention." As the afternoon began to give way to evening, the most anticipated moment finally arrived. Victoria's lawyer, who had discreetly been absent for about an hour, returned with an elegant folder in hand and a smile he could barely contain. Victoria immediately understood the significance of that gesture. The documents they had tirelessly fought for over the past few months were finally ready. With a racing heart, she gathered all the guests again, positioning Matthew and Emma by her side, while the lawyer formally announced the news. After numerous hearings, evaluations, interviews, and documentation, the adoption process had finally been completed and approved by the judge that very morning. The papers in the folder weren't copies or drafts. They were the official and final documents that legally transformed those three people into a family in the eyes of the law, just as they already were in their hearts. Victoria, with hands slightly trembling with emotion, signed the last necessary forms, while explaining to the children in simple terms the meaning of that moment. "This means that now we are officially a family. Forever. No one will ever be able to separate us," Victoria explained, her voice choked with emotion as she knelt in front of the children after signing the last document. "You are my children, not just in my heart, but also before all laws." "Forever for real? No more courts or people asking us questions?" questioned Emma, her expressive eyes alternating between Victoria's face and the documents in the lawyer's hands. For a moment, time seemed suspended as Matthew fully absorbed the meaning of those words and documents. Unlike his younger sister, he fully comprehended the legal implications of adoption, having anxiously followed each step of the process. His eyes, so similar to James's, intensely studied Victoria's face, as if looking for any sign of hesitation or regret. Finding nothing but genuine love and commitment, the boy made a decision he had kept in his heart for months, waiting for the moment he felt was right. With a step forward, Matthew wrapped Victoria in a tight hug, burying his face in her shoulder while whispering a single word that brought instant tears to her eyes. "Mom." It was the first time he called her that, having carefully used only her name during all the previous months, as if preserving that sacred title exclusively for Rebecca's memory. The significance of that moment did not go unnoticed by anyone present. Matthew had finally fully accepted his place in this new family, finding space in his heart to honor the memory of his biological mother while opening himself to the maternal love Victoria offered. "Yes, my son, forever," Victoria responded, tears of joy flowing freely down her face as she hugged both children. "This is just the beginning of our story together. Now we're a real family," Emma declared with the profound simplicity characteristic of children, taking Victoria's and Matthew's hands to join them with hers, like the angel on the medallion promised. The celebration continued with renewed joy, guests offering congratulations and small gifts to mark the special occasion. As the sun began to set, casting golden tones over the transformed garden, Victoria watched her children, now officially her children, running between the trees in an improvised game. The journey that had brought them to this moment had been marked by tragedy, pain, and devastating revelations, but also by healing, hope, and the discovery that families could be formed in unexpected ways. For every painful memory, they were now creating a new, luminous one, building together a future that none of them could have imagined months before. The shadows of the past had not completely disappeared. They never would. But they had found a way to honor them while moving forward. 3 once broken hearts, now carefully reconstructed into a new family constellation. "Sometimes I wonder if James somehow planned this," Victoria commented softly to the lawyer as they watched the children. "Not his death, of course, but this final union. As if, even after so many mistakes, he knew that one day the 3 of us would find each other and heal one another." "Some call it destiny, others poetic justice," the lawyer responded with an understanding smile. "I prefer to believe that true love, even imperfect, always finds a way to manifest itself." The moment of serene celebration was abruptly interrupted by the insistent ring of Victoria's phone. Normally, she would have ignored any call during this special day, having instructed her assistants not to disturb her except in case of extreme emergency. The number on the screen, however, belonged to the director of the Maximum Security Psychiatric Clinic, where Hannah had been committed after her trial, a contact who would never call without an extraordinarily serious reason. With a sudden feeling of alarm, Victoria discreetly moved away from the group, seeking a more private location to answer. The expression on the lawyer's face, who immediately recognized the number, revealed that he shared her apprehension. The agitated voice of the institution's director confirmed her worst fears. During the shift change that morning, taking advantage of a security breach and the complicity of an apparently bribed employee, Hannah had managed to escape. The authorities had already been notified. A search was underway, but for now Hannah's whereabouts were completely unknown. The director's final words made Victoria's blood freeze. During her therapy sessions, Hannah had spoken obsessively about the children and about finishing what she started. "I will immediately increase security at the house and provide additional protection for the children," Victoria responded with forced calm, her eyes instinctively searching for Matthew and Emma among the guests. "Keep me informed of any development, no matter how small. There's one more thing you should know," added the director, hesitation evident in his voice. Before escaping, Hannah wrote a message on the wall of her cell with lipstick that the corrupt employee apparently smuggled to her. It simply said, "This time I will not fail." The sun shone brightly over the newly reconstructed Villa Rebecca, illuminating colorful facades and wide streets that in no way resembled the cluster of precarious houses destroyed a year earlier. Where once there was rubble and despair, now thrived a model community, with solid homes, tree-lined squares, a school of modern architecture, and a community center whose harmonious design integrated perfectly with the local landscape. In the center of the main square, a bronze statue depicted a woman with open arms, protecting two small child figures, a tribute to Rebecca, who, even without knowing, had planted the seeds for this transformation through love for her children. Victoria, elegant in a simple yet sophisticated dress, observed the crowd with a mixture of emotion and pride, Matthew and Emma at her side, all three holding hands while receiving congratulations and thanks from the new residents. "I never imagined something so beautiful could be born from so much pain," Victoria confessed to the investigator, now a close family friend, who discreetly documented each important moment for the Rebecca Foundation archives. "Look at them, at all these people. There's hope and dignity in their eyes now." "You've transformed a tragedy into a legacy of life," he replied, observing how Matthew proudly explained the functioning of the community garden to a group of children. "There's no sweeter revenge against evil than multiplying the good it tried to destroy." In dramatic contrast to the luminous celebration at Villa Rebecca, the scene in a cheap hotel room on the outskirts of the city could not be more somber. Hannah, unrecognizable after months as a fugitive, observed her reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror while dyeing her hair with a cheap coloring. Her fingers, once immaculately manicured, now displayed broken nails and mistreated cuticles, stained by the low-quality dye she used to hide her identity. The tiny, poorly lit room with peeling wallpaper and a single mattress on the floor was her temporary hideout, the last in a long series of miserable accommodations where she had taken refuge in recent months. After her escape from the psychiatric institution, Hannah had quickly discovered that her infamy made it impossible to use any of her former resources. Her accounts had been frozen, her properties confiscated, her accomplices arrested or disappeared. What remained of her personal fortune, some jewelry and a package of money hidden years before for emergencies, was almost depleted. "Enjoy your moment of glory, dear sister," Hannah muttered to the newspaper open on the bed, where the headline announced the inauguration of Villa Rebecca that afternoon. "Your perfect happy family is about to face its worst nightmare. Again." "Are you sure you want to go through with this plan?" questioned the man sitting in the corner of the room, counting the payment Hannah had just given him. "That place will be full of security today. If they catch me, I won't protect you." The inauguration of Villa Rebecca reached its most exciting moment when Victoria took the small stage set up in the central square, accompanied by Matthew and Emma. Silence gradually took over the crowd as she approached the microphone, visibly moved by the visual impact of so many transformed lives. The families who had lost everything in the illegal demolition were now returning to homes better than they had ever owned, with legitimate deeds in their names and the guarantee that they would never again be victims of real estate speculation or forced demolitions. The Rebecca Foundation had not only rebuilt their homes, but had implemented professional training programs, educational assistance for children and adolescents, and permanent legal support to ensure that their rights would never be violated again. "We are not just inaugurating houses and streets today," Victoria began, her voice clear despite the evident emotion. "We are celebrating the rebirth of a community that refused to be defined by the tragedy it suffered. Each brick in these buildings represents not just materials and labor, but the conviction that we can and must build a world where all families have the right to a safe and dignified home. Mommy built all this because of our other mommy, who's in heaven now," Emma added spontaneously, approaching the microphone with the charming naturalness of children, drawing emotional smiles from the audience. "It's like she always says, love doesn't end, it just transforms." In the middle of the crowd watching the speech, the man hired by Hannah was observing attentively, looking for the perfect moment to execute the plan. Dressed as an ordinary construction worker, he had managed to infiltrate the celebration without arousing suspicion. His objective was simple: take advantage of a moment of distraction to grab Emma and take her to the meeting point arranged with Hannah. While waiting, however, he couldn't help but be touched by the genuine emotion that permeated the event. Victoria's words, the visible transformation of these people's lives, and especially Emma's innocence when speaking about her two mothers, all this contrasted dramatically with the image Hannah had painted of a cold businesswoman who had stolen the children out of self-interest. This place, these people. It's not what she told me, he muttered to himself, gradually retreating into the crowd as an unprecedented moral doubt in his criminal career began to take shape. There are children everywhere, entire families. What kind of monster plans revenge on a day like this? After the official speech, the celebration transformed into a true community party. Tables with typical foods were distributed around the square, a local musical group livened up the atmosphere, and families inaugurated their new homes with small individual ceremonies. Matthew, demonstrating a social confidence that would have been unthinkable months before, voluntarily guided groups of visitors through the educational center that had been named after his biological mother, Beggar Educational Center. Emma, in turn, charmed everyone with her recovered energy, running among the village children in improvised games. Victoria observed her children from a distance, allowing them to enjoy this moment of celebration while she conversed with authorities and potential partners for expanding the project. "The children are so happy and well-adjusted," commented the doctor who had cared for Emma, approaching Victoria with a glass of juice. "It's hard to believe they're the same ones I met on that terrible night at the hospital. They've taught me that resilience isn't just surviving the storm, but learning to dance in the rain," Victoria replied, her eyes following Matthew as he proudly explained to a reporter how he had helped choose the colors for the school's facade. "There are still difficult moments, occasional nightmares, but each day is brighter than the previous one." Hannah, strategically positioned at a safe distance from the celebration, waited impatiently in a car rented under a false name. Her eyes never left the phone, waiting for the message that would confirm the success of the kidnapping. The plan was simple. Once she had Emma in her power, she would force Victoria into an exchange, the girl for the transfer of a substantial amount to an overseas account, enough for her to restart her life far away, with a new identity. The minutes dragged on, turning into an hour and then two. No message, no call. Something had gone wrong. The growing anxiety soon transformed into panic when, through the car radio, she heard a news bulletin mentioning a thwarted kidnapping attempt at Rebecca Village with the arrest of a suspect. "Incompetent! Coward!" she shouted to the empty car, striking the steering wheel with fury while turning the key in the ignition. "You can't trust anyone these days. If you want something done right, do it yourself." "So you're the famous kidnapper who's been giving the authorities so much trouble," Matthew commented, with surprising maturity for his age, observing the handcuffed man being led to the police car. "You don't look so scary now." "The security worked exactly as we planned," explained the investigator, who had personally coordinated the protection scheme for the event, anticipating that Hannah might try something. He was identified as soon as he tried to get too close to Emma during the children's presentation at school. The failure of the original plan led Hannah to a desperate and impulsive decision. If she couldn't have Emma as a hostage for financial extortion, she would confront Victoria directly, using the gun she kept hidden in the glove compartment. Bypassing the main celebration, she drove along the secondary roads leading to the back of the village, where security would presumably be lower. In her fixation on the final confrontation, she didn't immediately notice that the winding road she was following was the same one where, years earlier, she had sabotaged James's car, causing the fatal accident that had initiated that entire chain of events. Victoria thinks she's won, that she has everything now, the company, the children, the public adoration, she muttered to herself, dangerously accelerating through the curves as she approached a viewpoint that offered a view of the entire village. "But I'm not finished with her, not yet. I'll make her pay for everything she took from me." It was the most frightening and at the same time most inspiring moment of the event. A television reporter was commenting, interviewing witnesses after the frustrated kidnapping attempt. Seeing how the entire community instantly mobilized to protect the girl, forming a human barrier around her until security arrived. "These people aren't just our neighbors now, they're our extended family," responded an emotional resident, hugging her own children. Lady Victoria taught us that true security comes from communities that care for each other. At the top of the viewpoint, Hannah finally parked the car, contemplating the panoramic view of the village illuminated by the golden late afternoon light. From her elevated position, she could see the entire extent of the celebration, people moving like small, colorful dots, the distant music arriving in gentle waves as the wind changed direction. For a brief moment of lucidity, she confronted the truth she had fought so hard to deny. Victoria hadn't stolen anything from her. Hannah had lost everything through her own actions, through choices made out of envy and greed. Years of manipulation, financial crimes, a premeditated homicide, attempts to kill innocent children. When exactly had she transformed into the monster she now was? "How did we get to this point, Victoria?" she whispered to the distant landscape, a solitary tear running down her face as she pulled the gun from the glove compartment. "We were just two sisters with different dreams. How did we become this?" "Mom, look. It's the perfect tree to plant in the new square," exclaimed Emma, pointing enthusiastically at a cherry tree sapling similar to the one they had planted in the mansion's garden. "Can we make one just like ours?" "That's a wonderful idea, my love," Victoria agreed, crouching down to her daughter's height. "That way, when you come to visit the village children, you'll have a little piece of our garden here too." Hannah's moment of reflection was interrupted by the distant sound of sirens. Had someone spotted her car at the viewpoint and alerted the police? Or was it just a coincidence, part of the reinforced security for the event? The sudden panic made her hurriedly return to the vehicle, dropping the gun in the process. As she bent to pick it up, she didn't notice that she had left the car in neutral instead of park, on a slight incline. The movement of the vehicle was almost imperceptible at first, centimeters that quickly turned into meters as it gained speed on the descent. When she finally noticed, it was already too late. The car was dangerously sliding toward the edge of the viewpoint, where a drop of dozens of meters awaited. In a moment of pure terror, Hannah lunged for the steering wheel, frantically stepping on the brake that didn't respond, without the ignition on. The vehicle continued its inexorable trajectory toward the precipice, the exact same spot where James had met his end years before. "No, not like this," she screamed in absolute panic, uselessly struggling with controls that didn't respond. "I can't end up like him, I can't." And to conclude our celebration, we would like to invite everyone to the performance by the children's choir from the new school, announced the Master of Ceremonies, while Matthew proudly guided a group of children to the stage. A special song composed in honor of this reborn community. "They rehearsed so much for this moment," commented Victoria, moved to see her son naturally assuming a leadership role among the other children. He found his voice, his confidence. It's a daily miracle to witness this. By a whim of fate, or perhaps a manifestation of the poetic justice that seems to govern certain crucial moments, Hannah's car stopped mere inches from the edge of the precipice, precariously balanced between safety and disaster. The absolute silence that followed the screeching of the brakes and the sliding of tires over gravel was almost deafening. Hannah remained motionless for long seconds, her body rigid with adrenaline, eyes fixed on the abyss that had nearly swallowed her. When she finally gathered the courage to move, she did so with extreme caution, aware that the slightest shift in weight could send the vehicle into the void. Inch by inch, she opened the door on the side opposite to the precipice and crawled out, abandoning the gun, her purse, and the last vestiges of her plan, along with the unstable car. "It's as if he were there, watching me," she murmured, raising her eyes to the sky that was beginning to show the first stars. As if he was the one who stopped the car at the last second. Not to save me, but so that I would have to face the consequences of what I did. Before we officially conclude this celebration, I would like to share some news that I just received, announced Victoria, briefly returning to the microphone after a discreet conversation with the head of security. "The authorities have just informed me that the person who posed a threat to our community has been located and is being brought to justice at this moment. We can all sleep peacefully tonight." "Does it mean the bad woman won't try to hurt us anymore?" asked Emma, looking up with eyes that still carried traces of fear, despite all the months of therapy and care. "Never again?" The news of Hannah's capture spread quickly among those present, bringing an additional sense of closure to the celebration. Without going into details that might disturb the children, Victoria had communicated the essentials. The final chapter of that traumatic story was finally being concluded. The complete details she would discover later: how Hannah had been found walking disoriented along the road near the lookout point, how she had immediately confessed her identity to the police officers who approached her, without offering resistance. How her car, miraculously balanced on the edge of the precipice, contained not only the gun she planned to use, but also a diary obsessively detailing every step of her past crimes and future plans, providing additional evidence that would definitively seal her legal fate. "Tonight, we celebrate not just new homes or a rebuilt community," concluded Victoria, embracing her children as she observed the crowd of hopeful faces before her. "We celebrate the victory of light over darkness, of love over hate, of truth over lies. We celebrate the fact that, no matter how painful our losses, there is always a path to rebuild, to heal, to move forward, not alone but together, as the extended family we have become." Since the inauguration of Rebecca Village and Hannah's definitive capture, in an isolated wing of a maximum security women's prison, the former businesswoman lived an existence that represented the complete opposite of everything she had valued in her previous life. The small austere cell with only the essentials allowed contrasted dramatically with the mansions and luxurious penthouses where she had lived. The standardized uniform had replaced designer clothes. Her once impeccably dyed hair now displayed extensive grey streaks. Her daily routine was rigidly controlled by others, waking up, eating, working in the prison laundry, sleeping. She who had once controlled financial empires and manipulated people like chess pieces. Even more painful was her complete social isolation. No visits, no calls, no contact whatsoever with the outside world, except for the occasional news she could glimpse on the prison's community television. "You have a visitor today," announced a guard, interrupting the monotonous routine that had become her life. "First one in a year. Must be your lucky day." "Visitor? There must be some mistake," Hannah responded, genuinely surprised. "I have no one who cares whether I'm alive or dead." In the visiting room, separated by a reinforced glass partition and under constant surveillance, Hannah found the last person she expected to see, Victoria. For long moments they just stared at each other in silence, the abyss between them seeming insurmountable. It wasn't just the years of crimes, betrayals, and attempted murder that separated them, but a fundamental difference in how they had chosen to live their lives, one building, the other destroying. One finding purpose in collective good, the other consumed by purely selfish ambitions. "Why did you come?" Hannah finally asked, her voice hoarse from disuse. "Did you come to gloat, to show how perfect your life is while I rot here?" "I came to give you something you never gave me, the complete truth," Victoria replied calmly, placing a folder on the table, "and to show you what could have been if you had chosen a different path." The folder contained documents revealing a final secret Hannah didn't know. Years before, when James and Victoria started the company, he had secretly structured the division of shares so that if something happened to him, Hannah would receive a significant share of the profits. Not the control she coveted, but enough to guarantee a comfortable and prestigious life. Ironically, if Hannah hadn't tried to manipulate the system, if she hadn't tread the path of crimes and betrayals to take what she believed she deserved, she would have naturally received a considerable fortune after James's death. All her elaborate schemes, every betrayal, every crime, all had been not only morally reprehensible, but completely unnecessary. "Fate has a cruel sense of humor, doesn't it?" Victoria commented, observing her sister's devastated expression as she absorbed the revelation. "You lost everything trying to gain what you would have already had if you had simply been honest and patient. Why show me this now?" "To torture me further with what could have been?" Hannah questioned, a tear escaping involuntarily. "What difference does it make knowing this when I'll spend the rest of my life in this place?" Before leaving, Victoria left an additional envelope containing photos of Matthew and Emma, not to provoke, but as a continuous reminder that the children Hannah had tried to destroy had survived and thrived. Victoria's last words to her sister were not of condemnation or triumph, but a solemn reminder that every choice brings consequences, and that Hannah's greatest punishment wasn't physical imprisonment, but living with the knowledge that she had destroyed her own life through conscious and repeated choices. Hannah's karma wasn't death, but something many would consider worse, living for decades contemplating what she could have had if she had made different choices, observing from afar the flourishing of the family she had tried to destroy, knowing she could have had her own version of happiness. "The true hell isn't losing everything," Hannah murmured to herself as she was led back to her cell after the visit. It's knowing you were the architect of your own destruction. Back in Rebecca Village, Victoria walked hand in hand with Matthew and Emma under the warm late afternoon sun. The small cherry tree planted in the central square during the inauguration already showed signs of growth, as did the tree in her mansion's garden, living symbols of the rebirth and healing they had experienced together. The transformation was complete and visible in every aspect. Emma healthy and vibrant, Matthew still protective but finally allowing himself to be a child, and Victoria, who had found in unexpected motherhood and service to others a fullness that no corporate success had ever provided her. "Why were you sad when you came back from your trip today, Mom?" Emma asked with the sharp intuition of children. "Your eyes were different when you picked us up from school." "Sometimes we feel sad about the choices other people make, my love," Victoria answered honestly, stroking her daughter's hair. "But then I look at you two, at everything we've built together, and I remember that some choices, the most important ones, we made correctly." Did you like Matthew and Emma's story? Then subscribe to the channel, leave your like and check out the next one that's waiting for you here on the screen. See you there.